The checked band is made up of almost 200 1-inch squares. Now that would be a lot of work if you were piecing and cutting them all individually, but using the Seminole strip set techniques, it's pretty easy to put this band together. This band, using full-length strips for your strip set, finishes at about 38 inches. If you would like a band that finishes closer to 40 or 42 inches, so all of your bands in your quilt are at least 40 to 42 inches, you'll need to make an extra strip set. It's actually just half a strip set. So cut one extra strip of each fabric and then cut them in half and make a second half-width strip set. If you have extra, you can use it to embellish a pillow, or like I've done here, I added it to a notebook cover. For this band, you'll use 4 different fabrics. Cut 2 fabric A strips, 3 inches, 2 fabric B strips, 1.5 inches, 2 fabric C strips, 1.5 inches, and 1 fabric D strip, 1.5 inches. Sew them together in this order: A, B, C, D, C, B, A, and press all the seam allowances in the same direction. Here is my completed strip set. As you can see on the back, all of the seams are pressed in the same direction. This is important because when we're sewing the segments together, we want the seams to nest, so they all need to be going in the same direction at this point. So now I will straighten my edge and then cut this strip set into 1.5 inch segments. I've cut my strip set into 1.5 inch segments. I was able to get 28 segments out of my strip set. If you get an odd number of segments, just set one aside. Then I divided my segments into 2 piles of 14. And I have all of the seam allowances going the same way. So what I'll do is I'll take one stack and flip it around, so I have seam allowances going down on this pile and going up on that pile. And then I'm going to join these together in pairs. So I would take the 2 stacks over to my sewing machine, and I want to offset them by 1 so that I get a unit that looks like this. And when I flip this over, my seam allowances will nest, because on the bottom one they're going down and on the top one they're going up. And I'd sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you want to be careful that all of your units, when you're done, look just like this. If you end up with a pair that looks like this, it won't work in your band and you'll have to take that seam out. I've pressed all my pairs and I have put them in 2 piles where they're all facing the same direction with the seam allowances going the same way. I'm going to take 1 pair from each pile and I'm going to offset them by 1 square here. And then I will flip that over, and once again my seams will nest, and I'll sew them into pairs using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll take these over to my sewing machine and do that, and then come back and show you what it looks like. Here are the pairs sewn into units of 4, and all the seam allowances are pressed the same way. So now I'll take 2 units of 4 and sew them into units of 8. And on the back, once again, you can see how all the seam allowances are pressed in the same direction. And that's what allows your units to nest as you put them together. So I'll keep doing that until I have my strip set completed. I've sewn all my segments together. I have my band folded here just so you could see the ends, but see how jaggy it is on the top and the bottom, and the ends are at a diagonal. So you might be wondering, how do you go from this to this? which is a nice straightly trimmed band that you can use in your quilt. Well, if you took your ruler and you just straightened these edges, you would lose a lot of the length of your band. So instead, this probably sounds crazy, we are going to cut the band in half. So I'm going to straighten it out here. And it doesn't really matter where you cut the band, it's more how you cut the band. So I have a 45-degree line on my ruler, and I want to make sure that it is aligned with one of my seams. And it doesn't matter, like I said, where you do it. Just make sure that your 45 is lined up and cut the band in half. Now you're going to take the two ends and swap them. And then join them together like that. I've sewn the two halves of the row together, so now you can see I have nice straight edges on the ends. So now it's time to straighten the top and the bottom of the row. The key to this is figuring out where you would have a 1-inch square on the end. All of these squares in the band are 1 inch, so you want to figure out where this one ends. So what I've done, I've drawn it on mine so you can see. Here is a 1-inch square of the orange. And I did that. I have this little 1-inch ruler, but you can use any ruler. And I'm lining it up so that I have 1 inch out here, and I drew around it. You don't need to draw the whole square. Typically what I do is I line it up, and then I just put a little dot. And I would go all the way across the band on the top and the bottom, making these little dots. Once you have all of your dots marked where the last square would end, you can join them together with your long ruler. And sometimes you'll need to, pull it a little to make them line up. And then you can draw your line. Now this line is not your cutting line. We still need to add 1/4 of an inch. Otherwise, all the points on that little orange square would get cut off. So there I have my line. And now when I cut, I want to go at least a quarter of an inch past that line to give me a seam allowance. And once again, you might need to kind of pull these a little bit to get them lined up. And there I have straightened the top of the row. I'll do the same thing on the bottom. Here are my completed bands in both colorways. Because the edge of the band is cut at a bias at an angle, I like to add a line of stay stitching all the way around the band. So I just sew it about 1/8 of an inch from the outside edge of my band, and that holds everything together until I'm ready to put it into my quilt.